Before kings ruled and prophets walked, there was a garden. In that sacred place, Adam and Eve bore not only the sons we know, Cain, Abel, and Seth, but also daughters. Their names were not recorded in the Holy Scrolls, for they were hidden beneath the weight of time and tradition. Yet, they were there, firstborn girls, born of dust and breath, carrying the same spark of divine image that burned in their brothers. Their names, though forgotten by many, were whispered in ancient tongues: Awan, Azera, Liba, Naama, and Kaziah, daughters of the first man and woman. They lived in a world untouched by iron or war. Walking barefoot upon the soft soil east of Eden, they learned to weave from the leaves, to gather from the earth, and to listen to the songs of the stars that filled the sky before cities drowned them in smoke. Adam, burdened by guilt yet determined to obey, had been cast from Eden with Eve. Together they built a life of labor and sorrow, but also of love and new beginnings. Eve, once the mother of loss, became the mother of multitudes. With each child, she tasted joy and pain anew. Her daughters, bright-eyed and curious, would play near the rivers of Eden, asking questions about the angels they saw watching from afar. "Mother," Awan once asked, "will we ever return to the garden?" Eve smiled, but it was a heavy smile. "No, child, but perhaps our children's children might walk with God again, as we once did." As Cain and Abel grew, so too did the daughters. And as the world stretched with time, nature made its demands. The command to be fruitful and multiply weighed heavily on the first family. There were no other people, only Adam and Eve's children. To fill the earth, they would have to marry within their own blood. This truth, though unsettling to the ears of the later generations, was not sin in those first days. The law had not yet come through Moses. The bloodline was pure. The world was young. And so, when Cain grew to manhood and his heart began to long for a companion, Adam gave him Awan, his sister. The union was simple, without ceremony, for there were no priests. The stars were their witnesses, and the Lord, though silent, saw it all. Cain loved Awan, though he was troubled, even then. The seed of jealousy toward Abel had already taken root. Awan saw it in his eyes when he stared too long at his younger brother, who seemed to please God more easily. She spoke softly to him, tried to soothe his unrest, but his heart hardened. Azera, another daughter, grew into womanhood just as Seth was born, after Abel had been slain and Cain cast out. Eve wept over her lost sons, but her hope renewed when Seth came. And in time, he too was given a sister, Azera, as a wife. Together, they would carry on the line from which Noah would one day be born. These unions were not shameful in those days, for what choice had they? The law of kinship and separation was not yet established. Every man and woman born then was of Adam's blood, pure, untainted, unspoiled by time's decay. Yet even then, a silence settled over the story of the daughters. When later scribes wrote the names of men and sons, the daughters' stories were left untold, not from shame, but from mystery. The ancient writers feared what later generations might think, or how they might twist the truth. But their story is not one of scandal. It is one of necessity, of courage, and of divine design in a world freshly born. For without Awan, there would be no line of Cain. Without Azera, no Sethite bloodline. The daughters of Eve were the hidden vessels of humanity's survival, forgotten by name, but never forgotten by God. The morning after Abel's blood cried out from the ground, the earth seemed darker. Eve knelt in the dust, pressing her face to the soil that had drunk her son's life. Her cries were deep, torn from the core of her soul. Beside her, Awan stood motionless, her hands trembling, her heart torn between the man she had married and the brother she had loved. Cain had fled the moment the Lord's judgment fell. His face twisted in fear, cursed and wandering, he did not look back. But Awan did. She watched him vanish over the hills. A man marked, not just by God, but by the guilt she had seen growing inside him. The family mourned in silence. Adam wept with Eve. The younger daughters, too small to understand the fullness of death, clung to their mother's skirts and asked when Abel would return. But Awan knew better. She knew that her husband had become the first murderer, and that she, now with child, carried the bloodline of both man and monster. In the quiet of night, she whispered prayers that reached beyond the stars. "Lord, If you can still hear me, protect this child. Let not the father's curse follow him. And though heaven said nothing, the stars above her seemed to hold their breath. Cain, meanwhile, wandered eastward into the land of Nod, a barren place far from the comfort of family. He built a city there and named it Enoch, after his firstborn son. But Awan never saw that child. She remained with Adam and Eve, raising her own son, also named Enoch, in the land of her parents. This confused many who would later write the genealogies, for the name Enoch appeared on both sides of the divided line, Cain's and Seth's, but they were not the same. One grew up in a city built by exile, the other in the quiet plains where Adam taught his children to till the ground. Awan grew older, but never remarried. She never spoke Cain's name again. Her grief was quiet, yet it shaped her. She poured her soul into raising Enoch to fear the Lord, to love peace, and to never lift a hand against his brother. In time, Adam called his children together and spoke of the world before the fall. He told them about Eden's rivers, the tree of life, and the voice of the Lord walking in the garden's cool breeze. But we lost it, he said, his eyes moist, and now we must live with what we've done. Awan, sitting near the fire with Enoch on her lap, looked into the flames and wondered how far the consequences would go. Would her son be punished for Cain's sin? Would the Lord always turn his face from their line? She didn't know then that generations later, her descendants would walk a path of violence, that the sons of Cain would forge tools of iron and war, that cities would rise from blood and sweat, all traced back to a brother's envy. But Awan did the only thing she could. She loved her son, she honored her parents, and she never forgot the price of wrath. In the silence of forgotten names, her voice still echoes, soft but strong. Though cursed be the man, let not the woman be erased. I bore life after death. I chose to stay, even when love betrayed me. Years passed in the land east of Eden. The grief that once consumed Adam and Eve began to soften, replaced by the quiet rhythm of planting and reaping, building and resting, sorrow and hope. Though the shadow of Abel's murder never fully left them, the Lord showed mercy in giving them another son, Seth. Unlike Cain, Seth was gentle and reflective. He often sat at Adam's side, listening to stories of the garden and the voice of God. From a young age, he showed a reverence for the Creator that reminded Eve of Abel, and perhaps that was why her heart ached and rejoiced in equal measure whenever she looked at him. By the time Seth reached manhood, his sister Azera had grown into a wise and steady woman. She had been born after Cain's exile and Abel's death, and was shaped by silence and sorrow. But from that quiet, she had drawn strength. She tended the flocks, soothed her younger sisters, and walked under the stars with questions that even her mother could not answer. Though Adam hesitated at first to allow another union between siblings, the Lord gave him peace. There were no others on the earth. Humanity's survival depended on these early pairings, and the line of promise, though unseen, was beginning to unfold. So Seth took Azera as his wife. Their bond was different from Cain and Awan's. There was no rage between them, no haunting past. Their love was slow and steady, born of shared faith and a desire to walk in righteousness. Each evening, they offered sacrifices, burning simple offerings on altars of stone, praying not just for themselves, but for all that would come from their union. In time, Azera conceived and bore a son. They named him Enosh, meaning mortal, for Seth said, "Let us never forget that we are dust and breath, and all our strength is from the Lord." With Enosh's birth came a new turning point in human history. The scriptures would later say, "Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord." That calling began in the home of Seth and Azera. It was she who taught her son to sing to the heavens, she who showed him how to kneel, she who whispered to him about the days of Eden and the holy garden that once stood behind a flaming sword. Azera's sisters watched her with wonder. They, too, longed for love and purpose. But the world outside their family was still silent and vast. Some daughters would later marry into Cain's line, joining distant cousins in Nod, though much was hidden about those unions. Others would remain unnamed, living quietly, helping raise the children that would fill the earth. But Azera's place was clear. She stood at the beginning of the righteous line. From her womb would eventually come Noah, Abraham, David, and the Christ himself, though she never lived to know it. Still, she felt the weight of destiny. One night, as she lay beside Seth beneath a sky full of stars, she asked, "Do you think our children's children will walk with God again?" Seth placed a hand on her belly and said, "I think the Lord is not done with us yet." Azera closed her eyes, dreaming not of Eden's return, but of a day when heaven would walk the earth once more. Among the many daughters of Adam and Eve, one was called Naama, which means pleasant or graceful. She was born many years after Seth, in a time when the world had already begun to stretch beyond the small circle of Eden's children. By then, humanity was growing. Sons and daughters were multiplying, and the line of Cain was building cities in the land of Nod, while Seth's line stayed closer to the ways of the Lord. Naama was unlike her sisters. While others were gentle or quiet, Naama was bold, curious, and thoughtful. She would often wander into the forest, watching the way animals moved, listening to the sounds of the trees as if they were whispering secrets. She asked many questions, some that even Adam could not answer. "Father," she once asked, "why must the world be filled with sorrow because of one act? Why must every birth come with pain and every man die?" Adam looked at her, his eyes weary. "Because we opened the door, Naama, and now all must walk through it. But the Lord has promised that one day, a child from our line will crush the serpent's head. Until then, we must wait and obey." Naama accepted the answer, but it did not settle her spirit. She longed to understand more, to see what lay beyond the mountains and rivers. She heard stories of her older sister Awan's sorrow, and of Cain's city, built in defiance, yet full of life and movement. She wondered what became of Cain's sons and daughters, and if any of them still remembered the Lord. It was said among the family that Naama was fair in appearance, so fair that even men from the line of Cain came searching. One of them was Tubal-Cain, a descendant of Cain known for forging iron and bronze. He brought gifts, metal, tools, and shining ornaments, and spoke in riddles and praise. Adam was wary. Seth forbade contact with the line of Cain. But Naama, she listened, though the scriptures say little about her. Ancient whispers tell of a quiet union between Naama and a son of Cain's house. Some say she married Tubal-Cain. Others say it was one of his brothers. What is certain is that she went with him, leaving her family behind. The day she left, Eve wept. "She walks into darkness," Eve whispered, "and I fear what seed may come from it." But Adam, now old and full of understanding, said only, "The Lord writes stories we cannot see." Naama lived in the land of Nod. She bore children, and through her, some say, the lines of the mighty ones, the Nephilim, would later emerge. Giants in the earth, men of renown. It is also said by some ancient scribes that Naama was a teacher of music and wisdom in that distant land, that though she walked with Cain's sons, she never forgot the Lord. She became a mystery, neither fully righteous like Seth's line, nor fully lost like Cain's, a daughter of two worlds. And in time, her name faded from the records, written only in the margins, passed down in whispers. But still, in the twilight of forgotten scrolls, Naama remains, the daughter who asked questions, who crossed the boundary, and whose silence shaped generations to come. In the quiet years that followed Naama's departure, another daughter rose in the household of Adam, Liba. Her name meant heart in the ancient tongue, and she was true to it. From childhood, Liba carried deep emotion. She was gentle in speech, but full of feeling, and her presence brought peace wherever she went. Unlike Naama's fiery curiosity or Azera's strength, Liba was a soul who nurtured, listened, and watched. She tended to the younger children, soothed her aging mother Eve, and walked beside Adam when his steps became slow with age. Of all the daughters, she seemed to remain closest to her parents' hearts. Liba rarely spoke of marriage. She watched as her sisters took their brothers or cousins as husbands, and while she did not protest the custom, something in her heart hesitated. She saw the sorrow that had touched Awan, the distance that claimed Naama, and even the pressure that rested on Azera, who was revered as the mother of the righteous line. Liba desired a different path, one not driven by duty, but by love and understanding. One evening, as the family gathered around a fire under the darkening sky, Liba sat beside her father and asked him quietly, "Father, did you love Mother when you first saw her?" Adam smiled. "She was made for me. There was no one else. I loved her because she was part of me." Liba thought long on that. In time, a distant relative, a son of Seth's growing household, took notice of Liba's quiet beauty and wisdom. His name was Kenan, a descendant of Enosh. He had heard of Liba's kindness and had traveled far to speak with her. He brought no gifts, only questions and stories, and she welcomed them. Over many seasons, Kenan and Liba sat beneath trees and spoke of the world, of the sorrow left by the fall, of the hope that still stirred in their blood. She found in him a heart that mirrored her own. Eventually, with Adam's blessing and Eve's tearful joy, they were joined as husband and wife. Their home was small, built near the hills that overlooked Eden's flaming boundary. Though they could never enter the garden again, Liba often stood at the edge, veiled in linen, gazing into the distance, her heart yearning for the place her parents once walked with God. She bore Kenan children, sons and daughters, who would help carry forward the line of the righteous. But more than that, she taught them remembrance. She was a keeper of stories, a guardian of memory. When the young ones would ask, "What was the garden like?" she would recite the tales told by Adam and Eve, the cool breeze, the talking serpent, the bitter fruit, and the mercy of God even in exile. And she taught them to pray, not loudly or publicly, but in stillness. She said, "The Lord listens best when we come with quiet hearts." Liba never sought greatness. She lived and died in a simple way. But her legacy remained like a whisper in the wind, steady, faithful, and true. Through her, faith was preserved like a flame in a jar, carried from one generation to the next. Though no great deed bore her name in scrolls, the line of God's promise ran through her veins, and heaven remembered what earth had forgotten. Of all the daughters born to Adam and Eve, Kaziah came last. Her name meant sweet-scented like cassia, but her life carried the weight of sorrow more than sweetness. She was born when Adam and Eve were old, when their hair had turned white like wool and their voices carried the tremble of time. By then, the earth had changed. The family had multiplied. Sons and daughters had scattered far, building their own homes, forming new tribes. But Kaziah grew up in a house of memory. She never knew Abel. She only knew of Cain. Through the cautionary stories whispered over firelight, she saw the grief etched into her mother's eyes and the burden worn in her father's posture. She felt the gap that sorrow had carved into her family. And so Kaziah, from her youngest years, became a daughter of lament. She would walk alone often, singing to herself in tones that were both haunting and lovely. Her voice was said to draw birds from the sky and deer from the woods. The children called her the wind singer, and the elders said she had been given a rare gift, to feel deeply what others could not express. Kaziah did not speak often, but when she did, her words stayed in the hearts of all who heard them. She asked questions that pierced the soul. Why must we live so far from Eden if it was once our home? Why do some people forget God so quickly, while others never stop seeking Him? Why are the women's names not written like the men's, when we also bear the seed of life? Adam had no answers for her. Even Seth, righteous and wise, could only respond with silence. It was as though Kaziah saw through time's veil and felt the pain of what was lost and what had not yet come. Though many suitors came, sons of Seth's growing line and men from distant camps, Kaziah turned them away. She did not reject marriage out of pride, but out of purpose. Her heart belonged elsewhere. She believed she was called not to raise a household, but to preserve memory and truth. She became a teacher to the younger women, especially the daughters, born to Enosh and Kenan. She taught them to write symbols in clay, to remember the names of their mothers, and to speak prayers aloud, even when no one else listened. Her home became a place of learning and quiet worship. One evening, Kaziah stood on a hill at twilight, watching the stars blink into the heavens. Eve, now old and weary, came beside her. "You remind me of Eden," Eve whispered, "before the fall." Kaziah looked up and replied softly, "I only long for what was lost, mother, and for what might still be found." Eve wept then, not for her sins, but for the beauty still shining in her youngest daughter, a beauty untouched by bitterness. Kaziah lived many years, never marrying, never bearing children. Yet her legacy outlived her. Her songs were passed down. Her questions became teachings. Her spirit echoed in the hearts of the daughters who followed, those who would become midwives, poets, prophetesses, and mourners, in a world that often overlooked women's stories. Kaziah refused to let them be forgotten. And though her name is not written in the scrolls of Genesis, heaven remembers. The sun rose and fell over the hills east of Eden, and generations came and went like waves on the sea. Adam and Eve were buried by their sons and daughters, their graves marked with stones and songs, not carved words. The memory of the garden remained like a fading dream, passed from lips to ears around campfires, in quiet huts, and beneath starlit skies. The sons of Adam were remembered in great genealogies: Cain, Seth, Enosh, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and beyond. Their lines built cities, carved tools, and filled the earth as God commanded. But the daughters, Awan, Azera, Naama, Liba, Kaziah, were slowly forgotten by the scribes of time, not by malice, not by shame, but by the pattern of a world that often placed women's names beneath the folds of history, even when their hands were the ones shaping it. Yet in heaven, their names remained spoken. Angels who had once watched Eve walk with God in the cool of Eden now watched her daughters walk through a broken world with courage, tenderness, and faith. They watched Awan raise her son after the pain of betrayal. They saw Azera stand firm as the mother of the righteous. They followed Naama into the land of Nod, where she tried to be a light in the shadows. They lingered beside Liba as she whispered Eden stories to her grandchildren. And they sang with Kaziah as she poured her heart into ancient songs that no man would write, but every woman remembered. Though the scrolls of men were filled with the names of patriarchs, the scrolls of heaven bore the names of the mothers, the sisters, the wives, and the daughters. For without them, the seed of promise could not have been carried. One night, many generations later, a young shepherd from Seth's line stood on a hill, gazing into the night. He knew nothing of Awan or Naama. He had not heard of Kaziah's laments or Liba's quiet prayers. But in his soul, he felt a deep stirring, a longing for something he could not name. And the Spirit of the Lord moved upon him, as it once had moved upon the daughters long before. From that line would come Noah, then Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and later David. And one day, from the womb of a humble virgin named Mary, a child would be born, a second Adam, to walk again with man, not in Eden, but in the dust of a fallen world. And in that child, the forgotten would be remembered. Jesus, Son of God, descended from both men and women, carried the faith of Azera, the sorrow of Awan, the boldness of Naama, the patience of Liba, and the voice of Kaziah. He did not forget the daughters. When he walked the earth, he healed them, honored them, spoke to them when others turned away. He revealed his glory first to women after his resurrection. He knew what the world forgot, how it had begun. In the quiet, holy halls of eternity, their names remain. Awan, who endured; Azera, who nurtured; Naama, who crossed borders; Liba, who remembered; Kaziah, who sang in sorrow. They were the wombs of the world, the heartbeat of humanity's beginning. Without them, there would be no kings, no prophets, no Messiah. They were the daughters of Adam and Eve, and they were never truly forgotten.